Hey folks, today's episode's once again brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial by going to www.audibletrial.com/epicfails. Epic with a K. The human species is an extraordinary creature. Resourceful, innovative, and capable of surviving under extreme conditions against unbelievable odds. Unfortunately, we also don't have the best track record when it comes to our world. The scientific consensus is that human-caused climate change is a very real threat that we could be dealing with for generations. Even the U.S. Department of Defense has stated that it poses one of the most significant threats to national security. Let that sink in for a second. The Paris Climate Agreement was established in 2015 to reduce global carbon emissions and combat the increasing threat posed by global warming. It was signed by 189 countries. The only significant countries to not join the effort were Iran and Turkey. Even North Korea signed up. Then, on June 1st, 2017, President Donald J. Trump announced that the United States would be pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement because it would, quote, undermine the economy. I repeat, even North Korea thought this was a good idea. Since the industrial age, we humans have been pushing our world to the brink. Between climate change, our dwindling unrenewable resources, dozens of endangered species, mass pollution problems, you'd think we would have gotten the memo by now. So, in honor of our one and only home planet Earth, I wanted to talk about some of the, creative ways we've shown respect and appreciation for nature. So for this Earth Day, I've assembled several podcasters from around the world to talk about some of modern history's worst man-made ecological disasters. I'm Erik Slater, and this is Epic Fails of History.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The one of the worst catastrophes in the world. It's all the humanity.
We've had a problem here. Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
Epic fails of history.
The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
When all the trees have been cut down, when all the animals have been hunted, when all the waters are polluted, when all the air is unsafe to breathe, only then will you discover you cannot eat money. Cree Native American Prophecy.
Hey gang, this is Devin from Pretend Radio.
Hi, I'm Justin Aki, graphic designer and one half of Significant Otter Co.
Hello, my name is MC from the best animated shows ever so far.
This is Troytle Power from the Power Playthroughs podcast.
Hello, my name is Joshua Dunham.
Hi, I'm Tyler.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from the Comic Zombie podcast.
This is Maine State House of Representatives candidate Pete Bourgelais.
Hey guys, this is Kory, a fan and friend of Epic Fails of History.
Здравствуйте, друзья, or should I say Kosh Kelin is there for any Kyrgyz listeners?
It's kind of appropriate that we're here talking about fails since most of us are stuck inside for what feels like the last 50 years.
I think one of the worst environmental disasters currently happening, and it's been going on for over 50 years, is the systematic destruction of the Amazon rainforest.
Because of essentially a series of failures escalating to the situation we find ourselves in now, which is essentially a global pandemic bordering on Walking Dead proportions.
Today, I'm here to provide info on the Fukushima Daiichi disaster.
I'm not here in my capacity as a candidate for office. but I'm here for epic fails of history.
I'm going to tell you about an ongoing epic fail of United States history regarding nuclear power and nuclear waste.
We're going to talk today about a subject that's near and dear to my heart in that it's really disgusting and really makes you kind of ashamed to be a human being.
I'm here to talk about the Aral Sea.
We're going to talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
In this episode, I'll be talking about Deepwater Horizon, or the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico.
I'm here today to talk to you about a very important environmental issue for Earth Day.
On today's Earth Day special of Epic Fails of History, I'm going to talk about the wildfires that happened at the end of 2019 here in Australia.
April 20th, 2010. It was probably a normal day for you, going to work, taking the kids to school, or maybe just playing video games and eating pizza. It was business as usual. But little did we know one of the biggest ecological disasters was happening that very same day. We all use oil on a daily basis, from filling our cars with gas, phones, and all our favorite childhood toys. More things are made from oil than we realize. As I'm recording this, I'm surrounded by products made from oil-based plastics. Oil has changed the way we live our lives, but what happens when things go wrong? I already talked about the Centralia mine fires back on episode 6, and as strange as that was, things get even stranger. In this episode, I'll be talking about the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, also known as Deepwater Horizon. BP is known as British Petroleum, and is a company we all know. I'm sure at some point in your life you've been to a BP gas station, but on April 20th, 2010, things didn't go well for the oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Let's just say it was an epic fail. So BP had an oil rig about 41 miles from the Louisiana coast. The rig was built by South Korean company Hyundai Heavy Industries and owned by a Transocean. All this sounds fine and dandy. What could go wrong? Well, how about an explosion? Like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse rained down hellfire missiles. Yeah, it was bad. Imagine being offshore at the place of your work, and there's an explosion. Talk about terrifying, like being in a foxhole during Battle of the Bulge. Scary. At approximately 7:45 p.m. on April 20th, 2010, high-pressure methane gas from the well expanded into the marine riser and rose into the drilling rig, where it ignited and exploded, engulfing the platform in flames. At the time, 126 crew members were on board, 7 BP employees, 79 Transocean, and employees of various other companies. 11 missing workers were never found despite a 3-day U.S. Coast Guard search operation to have died in the explosion. 94 crew members were rescued by lifeboat or helicopter, 17 of whom were treated for injuries. The Deepwater Horizon sank on the morning of April 22nd, 2010. The oil leak wasn't discovered until April 22nd. It was estimated the initial flow of oil was about 62,000 barrels a day, and the total amount after 87 days, was estimated at 4.9 million barrels or 210 million US gallons. Just think about that for a minute. I know, it makes my head hurt too. 210 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico, causing ecological and economic devastation that still has effects to this day. On April 30th, President Obama dispatched the secretaries of the Department of the Interior, Homeland Security, as well as the EPA administrator and NOAA to the Gulf of Mexico to assess the disaster. In his June 15th speech, Obama said, "The oil spill is the worst environmental disaster America has ever faced. Make no mistake, we will fight this spill with everything we've got for as long as it takes. And we will make BP pay for the damage their company has caused. And we will do whatever is necessary to help the Gulf Coast and its people recover from the tragedy." In the UK, there was anger at the American press and news outlets for the misuse of the term British Petroleum. It was said that the US was dumping, and that's in quotes, the blame on the British people, and there were calls for British Prime Minister David Cameron to protect British interests in the United States. British pension fund managers accepted that while BP had to pay compensation for the spill and the environmental damage, they argued that this will cost the company's market value from President Obama's criticism was far outweighing the direct cleanup cost. The US government rejected offers to clean up from Canada, Croatia, France, Germany, Ireland, Mexico, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United Nations. The U.S. State Department listed 70 assistance offers from 23 countries, all being initially declined, but later 8 have been accepted. The USCG actively requested skimming boats and equipment from several countries. So 23 countries offered to help, and the United States initially turned them down. I really would love to hear the logic on this. If you know, please let me know, because I can't find that anywhere. That just seems insane. 23 countries like, yeah, we'll help you, and they're like, nah, we're good, we got this. Okay, so you can see how this is just a complete and total mess, and everyone was wondering whose fault it is. So there were many criminal investigations from many different agencies, and ultimately it led to criminal charges. In April 2012, the Justice Department filed the first criminal charges against Kurt Mix, a BP engineer, for obstructing justice by deleting messages showing that BP knew the flow rates was 3 times higher than the initial claims by the company and knew that Top Kill was unlikely to succeed, but claimed otherwise. 3 more employees were charged in November 2012, were charged with manslaughter for acting negligently in the supervision of key safety tests performed on the rig to the explosion and failure to alert onshore engineers of problems in the drilling operation. David Rainey, BP's former vice president, was charged with obstructing Congress by misrepresenting the rate the oil was flowing out of the well. Lastly, Anthony Badalamenti, a Halliburton manager, was charged with instructing 2 employees to delete data related to Halliburton's cementing job on the oil well. Okay, so here's the kicker. After all of that, after all the charges, none of the charges against individuals resulted in any prison time, and no charges were levied against upper-level executives. Anthony Badalamenti was sentenced to 1 year probation. Donald Vidrine paid a $50,000 fine and received 10 months probation. Kurt Mix received 6 months probation, and David Rainey and Robert Kaluza were acquitted. I know there is way more to talk about, and I could get into all the details, but that would probably be a 5-hour podcast. So that's the gist of it, and this is probably one of the worst cases of corporate greed and oversight, and one of the worst cases of an ecological disaster that could have been prevented.
On March 11, 2011, Japan was struck by a magnitude 9 earthquake, the largest ever to hit the country. An hour later, a 46-foot-tall tsunami struck the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, causing a failure in power, repeated failure in cooling systems, and multiple explosions across 5 days, which resulted in an 18.5-mile land and air evacuation radius and at least 180,000 displaced citizens, marking the only other event in history to match Chernobyl on the international nuclear event scale. A little bit of history. This plant consisted of 6 reactors built between 1967 and 1979, was owned by the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO for short, and located right on the eastern sea line of Japan. At the time of this event, only reactors 1 through 3 were operational, while Unit 4 was being used as temporary storage for spent fuel rods. Despite all of the insanity within those first 5 days, they were repeatedly discovering new damage to the plant and surrounding environment. They discovered a slow leak, which had released 300 tons of irradiated water straight into the ocean in August of 2013. That's 2.5 years later, and was so bad it merited its own rating on the severity scale. Now, who failed? Well, everyone really. A lot of people failed here. The Japanese government had protocols for nuclear power plant failures and environmental disasters, but not a simultaneous occurrence. This meant meetings, which meant delayed response time and a reduction in manpower sent to each disaster. They also did not scrutinize their nuclear safety agency. The 2 biggest culprits were Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, NISA for short, and TEPCO, the owners. In a country known for earthquakes and tsunamis, both ignored that these would be a problem. NISA didn't ensure that TEPCO met any updated international safety standards, while TEPCO was voluntarily underprepared and outdated. Even before the original fires were put out, TEPCO was already trying to push cleanup responsibility onto the Japanese and US governments. The most troubling realization is that this event did not reveal any previously unknown fatal flaws associated with nuclear power and natural disaster. There is no way to prove that this event could have been completely avoided, but they sure could have tried. Established methods include redesigning older plants to withstand harsh conditions and improved waterproofing from electrical supplies. New methods include designing new passive cooling systems that require no electricity and checking plants every few years for potential safety hazards. There is so much more interesting information about this event. I highly recommend you listeners check it out. But if you want the abridged version, just watch Shin Godzilla. It's basically the same thing.
Now, anytime you use the word great, the initial impression, of course, is that it sounds like, something like a noble achievement, something to be proud of, almost as though we're proud of this monumental, quote-unquote, accomplishment in the field of polluting every last square inch of this entire planet, to the point where we're just almost daring it to kick us off. So we'll say not so great Pacific patch of garbage is described best as a vortex of trash, right? So you have like these plastic particles, various debris, so your sporks, your trash bags, plastic bags from the grocery store, the 6-pack ring from your soda or beer, that kind of crap. So it's just kind of swirling around in the Northern Pacific Ocean. So it's less of like an island of garbage per se, and more of just like this well-mixed soup of plastic bags and soda cans and just, needles and all kinds of garbage. It's super cool. So, just to be clear, it's not even just one specific patch of garbage, right? That would be bad enough. But it's like, Godzilla Jr. showed up. So it's not just one specific patch of garbage. It's actually made up of two huge swirling masses of garbage. They kind of feed off of each other, So you've got the first one, which is, the western garbage patch off the coast of Japan, because, of course. And then the eastern garbage patch off the coast of California, because why not? Each interconnected by this current of the subtropical convergence zone north of Hawaii. So there's this swirling current that kind of pulls all this together and just swirls it around on top of each other, about halfway between California and Japan. Not only is the garbage patch horrific and really terrifying, but it's also not unique to the Pacific Ocean, and that just happens to be the biggest one of these things. The volume of plastic debris in the ocean has increased 100 times over the past 40 years. So, since 1980, it's gotten 100 times worse. I mean, you let that sink in, that's insane. And what's worse than that is that 80% of that is from the land, not ships, where you imagine most of the debris in the ocean would come from, ships, litter coming from cruise ships or whatever. Approximately 65% of it, according to the Ugalita Marine Research Institute, is, quote, consumer-used plastics that have not been disposed of properly, end quote. So, your crappy cafeteria plastic silverware, your styrofoam, your plastic bags, all that garbage that people just, they don't dispose of properly. They're at the beach, and instead of going and throwing it in the trash can, they just kind of leave it on the sand. Driving down the highway by the beach and they just throw it out the window. Stuff like that, and it just, it gets out into the ocean, the currents take it out, and it just joins this massive, disgusting proof that, dominant species or no, we may not necessarily deserve to keep our position if this is the way we treat our house. It's really, really disgusting. I encourage anyone to look it up if they're even remotely interested or just kind of want to ruin their own evening. To see what we've done to the ocean is pretty disturbing. It's certainly an epic failure in my eyes to treat our own environment, our own ecosystem this way and make it, to the point where it doesn't even support life in some areas. But I guess there's also these new bacterias that are growing around this stuff that feed off of plastic. And I know that some science groups are actually trying to bioengineer some things like this, but there's some that actually have kind of grown out of this garbage island to survive off of this plastic.
In a past life, I was something of an international human rights activist focused on digital rights issues, aka internet censorship, privacy, surveillance in ex-Soviet Central Asia. Now, the Aral Sea is a lake that is on the border of what is now Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. But back in the day, it was part of the country that is the villain in 2 out of every 10 80s action movies, the Soviet Union. So the Aral Sea has 2 tributaries, and I've never heard of these rivers talked about out loud, so I'm probably gonna goof up the pronunciation, called the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya. And in the 40s, Joseph Stalin had a plan to change a lot of the agricultural makeup of that part of Central Asia, which Wikipedia translates from Russian as the Great Plan to Transform Nature. And in Russian is... Okay, let's see how much of my Russian I still have. This is like take 4. Великое преобразование природы. Jesus Christ. Isus Christos. Okay, anyway, part of that plan involved diverting the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya so that they wouldn't feed the Aral at all, but they would create all of these irrigation systems in Soviet Uzbekistan to promote the production of rice and cotton. And they thought cotton would be a really huge crop, and it was. By 1988, Uzbekistan was the world's largest cotton exporter, and as recently as 2006, it made up 17% of the country's exports. This also came with a lot of environmental costs beyond just what it did to the lake itself that we'll get into later. For example, there's a New Scientist article that I'm going to put in the description, I think. Erik, we can put that in the description, that talks about the intense industrial agriculture approach that the Soviets took to cotton production, including the use of some pretty nasty defoliants that were widely blamed to the increase in infant mortality rates in Uzbekistan. So with both of its tributaries cut off, the Aral Sea shrank to the point where it was only 10% of its original size. There are, of course, plenty of photos that have floated around in the years since of old rusty ships sitting out in the middle of desert where there used to be shoreline. One statistic that really helps drive home the extent of the environmental damage we're talking about here is the absolute cratering of the amount of fish caught in the Aral Sea every year. So in 1961, before the Soviets started to divert the 2 tributaries, the fish catch measured 34,160 tons. And in 2005, when the Aral had shrunk to its smallest point ever, it was 695 metric tons. Now, there is a sort of happy ending to this story. The government of Kazakhstan got some help from the World Bank to set up a dam that would start to rebuild some of the portions of the Aral that have drained out. It's actually like broken apart into 4 different sections where there are still water. So credit to where it's due to the Kazakh government. I've got a little bit of a history with them that you can find out on Interesting People with Evan Tolley when it has his first episode. The fish catch now is up to 5,595 tons in 2014, which is great. On the Uzbek side, it's a complicated matter that's really emblematic of a lot of different issues in Central Asia, where problems that would have been resolved in a very authoritarian top-down way from Moscow are now a matter of 3 different presidents with issues that cross international borders. And they haven't done the greatest job of cooperating over the past 30-ish years since independence. And there's a whole wild west of reporting about the petropolitics of Central Asia, and a good book for a general audience to get started on that is probably The Oil and the Glory by Steve Levine. It came out in 2007, so it's a little bit dated, but not too dated. So, at least on the Kazakhstan side, the Aral is coming back. The fish catch is on the up and up. People are coming back. There are Kazakh government statistics that say that about 5,000 people have come back to the Kazakh side of the Aral Sea area in the past few years, but it's still an open question whether the Uzbek government can work with Tajikistan to fix their side of the problem. And unfortunately, just as a preview of what's probably a future epic fail of history, I've got an article in the description that talks about how the UAE is looking to build a giant gambling complex on a village on the Uzbek side of what's left of the Aral, and there's quote after quote from people who think, who's gonna travel all the way out here to Uzbek Las Vegas when they can go to all these other destinations? So, hate to say that, but you'll probably hear about it on, like, a future episode 5 years from now.
Did you know in the US and Canada, bird populations have decreased about 30% since the 1970s? This rapid decline is due to several issues, including loss of habitat, deadly pesticides that kill both birds and their prey, global warming, and the most adorable invasive species, the domesticated cat. Cats are directly responsible for the extinction of several animal species around the world, including 33 bird species. In the US alone, cats are estimated to kill over 1 billion birds and over 6 billion other small animals a year. While the estimated 30 million feral cats roaming our streets, sleeping on our cars, pooping in our yards, and screaming randomly in the dark of night scaring the out of us are largely responsible for the high kill count, the 40 million pet cats with regular access to the outside world also contribute. If you have a cat, it's not hard to imagine. You've probably seen them activate kill mode when a bug or lizard makes the mistake of entering your home. I have. But cats are more than fighters. They're also lovers. A female cat can have her first litter at only 6 months old, and then produce a new litter every 4 months. On average, a single female can give birth to 12 kittens a year, and over the course of just 7 years, her offspring can produce nearly 3,000 cats. It's easy to see how the number of cats in the US has tripled over the past 40 years. So why am I focusing on cats when, as I mentioned, they aren't the sole reason for the decrease in bird populations? Well, it's partly because I just like cats, and when Erik asked me to contribute to this episode, my first thought was, how can I make this about cats? But more importantly, it's because this is a problem that almost everyone has the capacity to help with. So what can you do to help? 1. Do not kill cats. I repeat, don't kill cats. I can't stress this enough. My wife was super concerned when I was like, this is what I'm going to talk about. Because she was worried that people are going to take the wrong message from this and be like, cats are bad, we should kill cats, let's go kill cats. Don't kill cats. There are ways to lower their population that are much better, much more effective, and humane. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, if you do have a cat, try not to let them outside. No matter how much you feed your cat, it's still going to want to kill things. It's just kind of what cats do. And I totally understand. Some cats refuse to stay inside. So if you can't get your cat to stay inside, do what you can. But if you just got a cat, try not to let them outside, or, limit their outside time to when you can supervise. So how do we lower cat populations without harming the cats? It's actually kind of easy. You do what is called TNR, trap and release. As the name sounds, you trap the cats, you release the cats. In between, the cats get vaccinated. And over time, populations decrease. You also slow down the spread of disease. There's so many benefits. And I'm fortunate enough to live in a county that has no-kill shelters. And so our shelters actually pay for this to be done. You can catch a cat using a trap that you can borrow from them, or you can buy one on Amazon for like $20, $30, something around there. And you catch the cat, you just bring it in, they give you your trap back, they also take the cat, that's very important, and then they release the cat where you tell them that you found the cat. And it's great. It has so many benefits, including TNR reduces the shelter admissions and operating costs for the shelter. This is really good for the city. If it's a city-sponsored shelter, it kind of pays for itself. The programs create safer communities and promote public health by reducing the number of unvaccinated cats. Slows down the spread of rabies. TNR programs improve the life of free-roaming cats. When males are neutered, they are no longer compelled to maintain a large territory or fight over mates. And females are no longer forced to endure the physical and mental demands of giving birth and fending for their youth. It also gets rid of all those annoying behaviors that male cats have, such as fighting, screaming loudly in the dead of night, peeing on things, just generally being jerks. Another benefit is that it improves job satisfaction for those working at the shelters. No one enjoys euthanizing animals. I say almost no one. Let's go with almost. I'm sure there's some weird sickos out there, but no one enjoys it, and I can't imagine working at a job where your job is to just kill animals all day. That sounds awful. So, like I said, I live in a county that has no-kill shelters, and they pay for this. If you don't live in somewhere like that, what you can do is you can still practice TNR, but unfortunately, you have to use your own money. But you can reach out to local rescues, humane societies, see what they're able to help you with. They might be able to point you to resources such as low-cost vets. Maybe they're able to sponsor some of the cost. Maybe they can have a trap you can borrow. The key here is that you can help bird populations by also helping cats. So go save some cats.
In response to the last episode on time travel, Tyler Thornton wrote in on Discord, "I think it's funny that instead of preventing Lincoln's assassination, you would help have Johnson impeached." Yeah, it's a good point. Stopping Lincoln's assassination would probably be a lot easier. Yeah, that's a good point. Hear ye, hear ye. Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day free trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. For this Earth Day special, I thought it'd be appropriate to recommend Earth, the Audiobook, A Visitor's Guide to the Human Race, by Jon Stewart of Daily Show fame. Not only was this put together by Jon Stewart and the Daily Show correspondents, it even features a special performance by Sigourney Weaver. And it's only 3.5 hours. While it might be a little outdated since it came out in 2010, I still think it holds up pretty well. Jon Stewart is an absolute gem. Now, I should point out, I didn't choose Audible as a sponsor at random. I chose Audible because I really, genuinely valued their service. Like a lot of people on a budget, I also recently had to cut back on a few expenses, but I absolutely can't do without Audible. Seeing as we're on lockdown during this pandemic, what better way to pass the time than with a good audiobook? I was seriously paying for I want to say 6 different streaming services? Anywho, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/epicfails with a K. Again, that's audibletrial.com/EPIK fails for your free audiobook. Oh, and before I forget, all 4 Epic Fails books are now available on Audible, including Not So Great Presidents, by myself, Erik Slater, and Ben Thompson. Huzzah!
Do you like video games? Ever thought about making a video game? Do you find that a week or 2 weeks is kind of short for a game jam? Well, have I got the game jam for you? With the We Can Make This Work Probably Game Jam. The jam runs from April 20th to June 9th to provide a nice amount of time for you to make something cool. And the theme is, if you can smell that fart, you're not far enough apart. Shout out to the Lebanon, Maine Fire Department for this meme. Check out the link in the description for more information and to figure out how to join and submit. Have fun!
This story is of personal significance to me because my hometown of the Tri-Cities, Kennewick, Richland, and Pasco in southeastern Washington state plays a central and historic role. Growing up, I would go to a park on the river called Leslie Groves Park. Only later did I learn that it was named after General Leslie Groves, who headed the Manhattan Project. In December 1942, he led the selection of the desert north of Richland as the new site to develop weapons-grade plutonium for American atomic bombs. This is called the Hanford Site. The federal government acquired the 670 square miles of land through eminent domain, kicking off 1,500 people, including Wanapum Native Americans. The plutonium produced at Hanford was the plutonium inside of the original atomic bomb mushroom cloud of the Trinity test site in New Mexico, as well as the infamous bomb that landed on Nagasaki, Japan. Pretty nice claim to fame for my hometown, huh? I can just see it now, written on the side of the bomb, plutonium made in Richland. There's a culture of this in Richland that you don't think too much about at first growing up. Driving down the street, you see the Atomic Ale Brew Pub. The most notable item is Richland High School's mascot. They are the Richland Bombers. Now, the name actually comes from a bomber plane used in the war, not the atomic bomb itself. However, the current logo is an R with a mushroom cloud behind it, clearly referring to the atomic bomb. Now, the Nagasaki bomb, dropped in 1945, effectively ended World War II. But it is important to remember that the Hanford site operations were completely veiled in secrecy until 1945, even for people who worked there. Very few people really knew what was being produced and what it was for. Over the decades, the Hanford site reactors then produced 67 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium, which is 65% of the plutonium the federal government has produced for weapons nationally. This resulted in a lot of nuclear waste. 87% of defense-related spent nuclear fuel in our nation resides at the Hanford site. From these numbers, it is clear that Washington state bears the bulk of responsibility for the defense nuclear waste problem caused by production of weapons in World War II and the Cold War. Waste cleanup officially began only in 1989, and the production reactors were closed in 1990. Underground tanks are 8 miles from the Columbia River, and scientists have been addressing leaks and cleanup issues ever since. Now I will discuss some of the federal plans associated with addressing nuclear waste. Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, NWPA, of 1982 to address the national problem of what to do with high-level nuclear waste produced from both defense and commercial reactors. The plan was to study 9 viable locations for a national deep geologic repository where waste could be stored as vitrified solid glass far away from cities and rivers and shielded by rock and earth. However, Congress passed the amended NWPA in 1987, identifying Yucca Mountain as the only site to move forward with, removing Hanford since it was next to the Columbia River, and several other sites from the original 9 locations. A significant bipartisan majority of Congress supported the amendment. Mainly it was only Senator Reed of Nevada who pushed back against it, concerned it would drop gambling and tourism revenue to Nevada. He framed it as the Screw Nevada bill, despite the fact that in 1975, the Nevada state legislature had already passed a resolution in support of locating the repository at Yucca Mountain. In the 2000 election, Reed was concerned the project would move forward if Bush was elected. He sought assistance to undermine the project by a non-Nevadan named Gregory Jackso, a physics PhD. He wanted a state outsider to seem unbiased. Jackso became Reed's handpicked choice for commissioner of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission known as the NRC. The NWPA of 1987 indicated that if Congress and the President formally picked a site, the Department of Energy, or the DOE, was required to submit a license application for the site to be reviewed by the NRC. This formal action was taken during the Bush administration in the form of the 2002 Yucca Mountain Development Act. The application was submitted by DOE in 2008. The NRC had 3 years to review. By this time, Jackso was commissioner and Obama was president. Obama's proposed federal budget then for the fiscal year 2010, once he was in office, essentially was to completely cut all funding for Yucca Mountain, and he had his Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, file a dismissal of the DOE application to the NRC Review Board. Jackso, as NRC commissioner, then arranged for the application review to be closed, in direct contradiction to the requirements of the 1987 NWPA. So we have arrived at the epic fail. Robert Ferguson, a nuclear scientist, you guessed it, from Richland, Washington, then filed a lawsuit against Chu and Obama for disobeying the 1987 NWPA law. However, despite the court's decision, no further work has been done on the project, and it remains to this day at a standstill. The DOE was supposed to start accepting national nuclear waste back in 1998. Ever since, 22 years, nuclear utilities have filed claims against the federal government for breach of contract and damages for costs paid to government for security and storage of their fuel. In 2011, the DOE estimated that these damages would rise to $20.8 billion if DOE accepts waste by 2020. Guess what? It is now 2020, and DOE is still not accepting waste because we still don't have a repository. It will reach at least $31.8 billion if DOE doesn't accept waste by until 2042. That is more money in paying damages to companies than the amount of money collected by 2014, $30.9 billion, in the Nuclear Waste Fund meant to address the nuclear waste problem. I'm going to say that one more time. The federal government pays out more in damages for failing to build a solution for our national nuclear waste problem than it collected in revenue to build a solution for our national nuclear waste problem. Certainly makes you wonder why we didn't just build a solution to our national nuclear waste problem and not lose money to utilities indefinitely. This is an epic fail of U.S. history. The billions of dollars on design and build are running under the assumptions that, according to the 1987 NWPA, the federal government will accept high-level nuclear waste at the National Repository built at Yucca Mountain. The vitrified glass being produced now at Hanford to this day is literally designed to specifications of the facility that has been destined for Nevada since 1987. So, the federal government failing to provide a national repository essentially nullifies all the money and work spent on the Hanford waste treatment plant in Washington state. Washington state is very unhappy about this and has gotten into some litigation against the federal government over this very point. Consider this. There are 122 different nuclear plants in 38 different states that store nuclear waste on site. This is existing sites. We will ignore the idea of building new power plants in this following discussion. Those sites, in their need to provide electricity to citizens, were often built within 50 miles of major cities and along rivers since they need water for coolant. Do you really think that it is better to have open pools of spent nuclear waste or casks in the ground at 122 different places in 38 different states, close to major cities and rivers, than it is to locate all of the waste in a purpose-built facility deep underground, protecting people from radiation through thick rock far away from major cities and rivers? Because those who are against Yucca Mountain are really saying they are for the waste staying much closer and much more in the open to them in 38 different states. Now, it is a fair question about whether Yucca Mountain itself is the best site, and if the state was given sufficient incentive to be the host, and what local tribes feel about the project. But it is worth remembering that Nye County, Nevada, has continuously supported the project through the years, along with the 6 adjoining counties, and this is where the Yucca Mountain is actually located, in these counties, because of the economic benefits and jobs they would receive from housing this national repository. They were, very much for the project. It was other northern parts of Nevada away from Yucca Mountain that opposed it, such as Las Vegas. A 2015 survey indicates that 55% of Nevadans think it is worth having a discussion about what benefits Nevada could receive in exchange for hosting the repository. So to conclude, unfortunately, we are set back in addressing climate change because of arguments over nuclear power, which really come down to addressing nuclear waste. Plans to address the problem have been in the works for decades, and yet we remain at a stalemate. We must take responsibility for the waste we produce from the bombs that we built in the World War II and the Cold War, and rather than let it sit next to our cities and rivers while the government continues to misuse taxpayer and nuclear ratepayer money in litigation about their failure to build a nuclear waste solution, we must find a way to build a national waste repository. I'm open to it being at a different location than Nevada if it must, but remember that 3 decades of time, money, research has already gone into validating Yucca Mountain, and time is of the essence with climate change.
So, as you've already heard on this episode, no doubt, there are a lot of really awful examples of humans completely and carelessly destroying the environment for petty and selfish reasons. But one of the most epic environmental fails that comes to mind, for me, is so absurd that it sounds like an over-the-top evil Bond villain plot. 1978's Love Canal incident. It's one that's very near and dear to my heart, no pun intended. Now, this may sound like a romantic fair ride, but I assure you, it was far more sinister. Love Canal was a small community in Niagara Falls, New York, that had fallen on hard times. William T. Love had the canal built by immigrant workers as part of a massive renovation project that would connect the Niagara River to Lake Ontario. His vision, however, was never realized when he ran out of funds and the project was abandoned, leaving a 1-mile-long trench. Now, the site eventually became a popular place for children to swim in the summer and ski in the winter. Throughout the 40s and 50s, the site had been a common dumping ground for all manner of toxic waste, thanks to the super negligent Hooker Chemical Company. Now, if that wasn't bad enough on its own, Hooker Chemical not only covered up this heavily polluted canal with layers, of soil. But then in 1953, they sold the dumping site to the Niagara Falls School Board for $1. So yeah, just to recap, this over-the-top evil corporation not only tried to cover up their nefarious actions, i.e., dumping chemicals and literally paving over it, they then sold their toxic waste dump to a school board. I repeat, a school board. When construction of a new elementary school started on the property, during excavation, the workers discovered 2 large dump sites filled with chemical drums. Now, the architects expressed concern because, it would be poor policy to build a foundation atop potentially hazardous chemicals. Maybe not the best place for a school. In response, they simply moved the school 80 feet north. 400 children attended the elementary in 1955, and a second school opened just 6 blocks away. That same year, the ground partially caved in, exposing chemical drums near the playground. The real problems began to rise when new neighbors began to spring up over the contaminated land and construction of a new sewer system began. During housing development, the sealed chemicals began to leak into the sewage system, because of course they did. In 1962, heavy rain released a flood of oily chemicals seeping up from below. Birth defects, miscarriages, asthma, epilepsy, cancer, and other health-related anomalies began to show up over the next decade. But it took a while before the people put 2 and 2 together and realized that they were living on 21,000 tons of toxic waste. So, the Hooker Chemical Company and the US government remained silent to protesters for years, until the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, ironically started by Nixon, stepped in and led a full-scale investigation. Eckhart C. Beck reported, "I visited the canal area at the time. Corroding waste disposal drums could be seen breaking up through the grounds of backyards. Trees and gardens were turning black and dying." Seriously, this whole situation was a dumpster fire. The matter was never fully resolved until 1995. After proving the correlation between health complications and exposure to toxic waste, what do you know? When the EPA sued the company for $129 million in restitution. Love Canal has been appropriately dubbed a national symbol of a failure to exercise a sense of concern for future generations. Where's Captain Planet when you need him?
Fire! Wind! Water! Heart! Go Planet!
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet!
Captain Planet, he's our hero. Gonna take pollution down to zero. He's our powers.
Hey there, friends. This is Troytle Power. And what I want to know is, why are we still using gasoline? I just don't get it. I mean, we all know it's bad, right? Like, we all know that is not like an environmentally friendly way for us to propel ourselves through the world. And there's so many other options available to us. I mean, all right, so like there's electric cars, right? We all know electric cars exist. There's all sorts of arguments against why we would use electric cars. Like, they don't go fast, they don't make vroom vroom sounds loud enough, but that's all dumb. I've heard people argue that gas stations would go out of business, which means less jobs. Okay, maybe, but hey, get with the times, all right? And there's also, like, other alternatives, like, why don't we have pedal cars? I would drive a pedal car. Now, granted, wouldn't work on a highway, but I like riding a bike. You could let me get, like, make me a little four-seater that I could put my family in, and we could pedal like we were in the Flintstones. That'd be great. I'd totally be down for that, and I bet there'd be a lot of people who'd be too. Can you imagine telling people who live in Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, either one of them, that they could drive a little pedal car to work, or it'd be like a bicycle, but it's a car? That'd be pretty cool. And then, we get to the real options. Because, do y'all know about the French fry car? So, here's the deal. There's this guy. He lives in Mississippi, and his name is, what's his name? His name is Robert Torney. Nope, Tomey. I can't read. His name is Robert Tomey. Robert Tomey owns 4 McDonald's. Now, most of us don't own 4 McDonald's, so that's a little bit of a hurdle here right off the bat. But here's the deal. Robert figured out that he had so much French fry grease from his 4 McDonald's. He's got so much French fry grease. He's like, what am I going to do with all this French fry grease? I'm just dumping it out. It's crazy. If only there was a way to make my little Volkswagen Beetle run on French fry grease. And so you know what he did? He did it. And he made his little Volkswagen Beetle run on French fry grease. And then he made his company truck run on French fry grease as well. And both of them run on French fry grease. He just takes the grease out of the French fryer and he dumps it into his car, and that's how he powers his vehicles. And you know what he says? He says he has those 4 locations. He says he produces enough grease for 20 to 30 cars from those 4 locations. That means one McDonald's can power 4 to 7.5 cars per year. Now, that's not a lot of cars, but there are a lot of McDonald's out there. So if some of us go to the little pedal cars like we're in the Flintstones, and some of us go to electric cars, and some of us go to French fry cars, then I think we could all get away from gasoline, and it would just be better for the planet. And you know what the best part about the French fry car is? When you drive it, it smells like popcorn.
Just beyond your dreams, there is a secret world where every sound is a song, every tree a home. But now, this most enchanted place is about to face its greatest threat. Join their struggle for survival.
Stop!
Spread the word.
How can you live without trees?
And plant the seed to save a place called Fern Gully, the last rainforest.
The Amazon rainforest in Brazil produces 20% of the world's oxygen. It has the most biodiversity per square acre than anywhere else on Earth. There are entire microbiomes located around like one specific tree, with creatures never seen before, ever. The amount of plant-based medicines we found down there is staggering, with over 40,000 identified at this point, including the original source of the anti-malaria drug quinine, among others. So what are we doing as a people? We're cutting down the land so illegal squatter farmers can raise beef cattle for export to Western countries. Actual landholding farmers are burning large swaths of forest that border their lands to expand their farm, usually for rice and soybean planting, again, mostly for export to richer countries. Last year, over 72,000 fires were reported, with only some of them were natural causes. Quick primer, the soil in the rainforest is actually pretty poor. It's acidic or rocky, it just doesn't fit. The real richness of the forest is the trees and ground cover itself. So when someone slashes and burns all the trees and ground cover, part of the forest, they move in quick, plant something for the season, and that usually completely destroys any nutrients that were there. So they have to keep destroying more forest to get more land in an ever-increasing exponential cycle. Latin America is home to only 13.6% of the world's population, yet its farming industry accounts for over 23% of the world's beef and buffalo meat production, and 21.4% of poultry. So Brazil itself exports 16.7 billion with a B worth of animal products annually, followed by about $25 billion worth of soybeans. So it's a big deal for farms to make as much money as possible to support the economy of Brazil, but it's coming at the cost of lost rainforest. So the good news? I'm not sure what news there is right now. There's been several campaigns to stop deforestation, but the current Brazilian president has actually been pushing for more farming and less regulation. So until that changes, I'm not sure when it's going to stop.
I'm going to talk about the wildfires that happened at the end of 2019 here in Australia. It's believed that the underlying factors that contributed to the fires being so bad were in the middle of a drought, a very long drought. There was a heat wave going on, and there was some really strong winds as well. So I believe that climate change has really affected the annual fires that seem to happen here in Australia. With the rising temperatures, we are expected to have more drought. I would expect it to be getting worse if climate change keeps happening, because the temperature is just going to keep rising here in Australia. But the other factor was we were having really strong winds at the time, so that was pushing not only the fires along, but also the smoke. The smoke got so bad at one stage, it did reach all the way across the Tasman to New Zealand. But one of the other things that happened was, because of the temperature and the drought, all the brush and grasslands and stuff were all dry, and the fires were just pushed by the wind through these areas, and it was a really bad time. There was a whole bunch of land covered by these fires. If you don't know, it was about half of Australia at that time. You can actually find diagrams and stuff online about how bad the fires in Australia were, with it overlapped on a US map, and you can actually see how bad it was at times. So with Australia being in a drought and the heat wave, normally these fires happen every year here in Australia. They're normally naturally occurring. Maybe a lightning strike or something else will happen. But some of the fires at the end of last year were lit by people, and that's probably another factor of why they got so bad and so out of hand as well, because there was just so many already, and there weren't enough people who volunteered to fight the fires. We were in the middle of a drought. There was just not a lot of water to fight all these fires, and a lot of the firefighting was reactive. Many houses were burnt down. There was human life that just were taken by these fires, and a lot of wildlife was destroyed in the fires as well. So one of the big things is, with all the fires, there was a lot of smoke. And with the wind pushing it into large cities, there was a lot of people with respiratory issues that were having trouble breathing, because there were times where the smoke was down on the ground and it was so thick you couldn't actually see through it. There was a few mornings where I couldn't see probably 30 meters in front of myself because the smoke was that thick, and I found it hard to breathe myself. And I was working with someone who has asthma, and he said he went through a 3-month supply of his puffer in about a week. So you can imagine how other people might have had trouble with that at the time. And like I said earlier on, there were days where it stretched across the Tasman and hit New Zealand, and there were days where Australia had the worst air quality in the world because of these fires. It was really scary at times to think about how close some of the fires were getting to major populous areas, and it did run through a few towns and just destroy them. And the loss of human life and wildlife throughout all of Australia is really saddening to think about. And it's also sad to think about all the people who might have not been directly affected by the fires, but indirectly through the smoke. To see that impact in my lifetime and not really expecting like the severity of it, and the response of some of the people in government at the time, I found very appalling. And them trying to deny climate change, I found very disheartening, when it was probably a major factor in why these fires were so bad. In the future, I hope that Australia fire seasons aren't as bad as they were during this time at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. But really, I believe trying to fix climate change is going to really help us in the end, to bring down the temperature so it's not so dry, and hopefully it won't affect us as bad in the future, but we'll have to wait and see.
So on this Earth Day, let's just try to do better, and hope you guys are doing well.
Thank you very much. I would like to state that most of my talk here today comes directly out of 2 books that I highly recommend: Nuclear Waste in Your Backyard by Robert Ferguson and Atomic Geography by Melvin Adams. A few items were also pulled from Wikipedia. Thank you.
You can follow me on Instagram at JacksCatCold to see pictures of my cats.
So, I guess if there's one lesson to be taken from all of this, besides people will never learn and we're going to find a way to ruin anything, is like Dr. Ian Malcolm said in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. And that's about it.
До свидания.
So I know this is kind of a doom and gloom topic, but I want to remind everyone that it's not all bad. Today we are on the precipice of a new green revolution. We have the opportunity to be better than those who came before us. Between pollution, deforestation, melting polar ice caps, endangered species, and dwindling non-renewable resources, we certainly have our work cut out for us. But if we work together, we can change the world for the better. Climate change is very real, and yes, we caused it. Look, no one's perfect. I'm certainly not, obviously. But even the small things we do can have an enormous impact. If everyone was just a little bit more aware of their carbon footprint, this world, our planet, our only home, could be a much better place. Not just for us, but for the thousands of generations to come. So here's just a few things that you can do to make a difference. I know it's cheesy, but please recycle if and when you can. When possible, choose to consume energy from renewable resources. Support non-profit initiatives like the Conservation Fund, Earth Justice, 350.org. Invest in solar panels, save up for a Tesla, or look for green products. Use reusable grocery bags, or try to use less plastic ones at least. If you can, cut back on using plastic water bottles, or at the very least recycle them. Also, consider these issues when you go to vote. Seriously, it does make a difference. None of this happens overnight, and no one person can do it all, but every little bit really does help. It took me a while to really get in the habit of recycling, sorting what goes where, and all that. Despite these extraordinary challenges, history reminds us that we as a species also have this annoying habit of saying, "hold my beer," before doing the impossible. So as always, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. We're all in this together. Do your part and be on the right side of history. Also, maybe don't dump chemicals in a canal and then build a school on top of it. Seriously. I want to give a huge thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, including but not limited to everyone from the We Can Make This Work Probably podcast network. You can hear most of us over on Podcasters Assemble, where this season we're covering all 25 Bond movies, counting down to No Time to Die. This past week we did Goldfinger, and this Friday's Thunderball. Check the show notes for more details on where you can find them all online. I also want to thank my fiancée Meg for putting up with me.
I'm Troy.
And I'm MC.
And we host the best animated shows ever so far,
where we watch, discuss, and rank every animated show ever, eventually.
Listen in by searching for the best animated shows ever so far on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or head to probablywork.com.
Join the conversation by finding us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram by searching Base SFcast. That's BASESFCAST.
And don't change the channel.
This has been a presentation
of the We Can Make This Work
Probably Network.
Follow us on Twitter
@ProbablyWork
for more of our questionable content.
Also, we have a website called probablywork.com.
It smells like popcorn.